Well, thanks for staying with us on the program this morning. Our next conversation is as it concerns the legislative interventions in the 10th National Assembly, particularly on key issues that affects Nigerians. For one, the 2025 budget, an appropriation with a record 54.99 trillion naira. A lot of persons called this appropriation bill, at the time it was 49 trillion naira thereabouts, overambitious. Now that it is 54.99 trillion naira, what's the opinion of Nigerians, particularly with the deficits in funding and the amounts earmarked for debt servicing? Can Nigeria meet up in terms of financing its fiscal year in 2025? Now, to discuss this and give us insights, I'll be discussing with a first-term federal legislator in the 10th National Assembly, representing Abak, Etim Ekpo, and Ika Federal Constituencies from Akwa Ibom State. I'm talking about none other than Honorable Clement Jimbo. Honorable Clement Jimbo, good morning. It's nice to have you on the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Now, particularly, it's from the angle of concerns on the year 2025. We remember last year, to be specific, in December, when that budget was presented before the House. Now it has gone through the 3 readings and is awaiting presidential assent. Many Nigerians have called the 2025 budget largely optimistic. I don't know if having hope is a bad one, but owing to the fact that your party dubs its umbrella under the Renewed Hope agenda, is it that this is more of the budget that will bring Nigeria the much needed respite in terms of the economic challenges we're going through?
Well, thank you very much. Before I answer your question, let me comment your very beautiful tie. Your outfit, fantastic.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I appreciate you.
That obviously tells me one thing, that the ABN is taking care of his staff.
Oh.
All right, having said that, let me delve into your question. Yes, like I always said, if you want to know what is in for Nigerians with regards to the 2025 budget that we've just passed in the House about 48 hours ago, look at what we did in 2024 and where we were in 2023 and where Nigeria is now in 2024, then you can now radiate into 2025 to see what will likely be. Clearly, the budget of 2024, the president and of course the executive in their wisdom named it Renewed Hope budget. And in 2025, they've named it Budget of Restoration.
Securing peace and building prosperity.
Absolutely. And you say, is it overambitious when you look at the number? Initially, what was presented was 49.7 trillion. But what we've passed in the House and of course in the Senate is 54.99 trillion. If you ask me, it is still not enough. Because if you look at the indices, the population of Nigeria, you look at the land mass in Nigeria, you look at the per capita income, the GDP of Nigeria, if you compare that with our closest neighbor, which is South Africa, you compare that with an African nation equally, that is in terms of population, we can be ranked at par. Brazil. Brazil has a population of about 231 million people. Nigeria has over 200. Look at the budget of Brazil. Compare that with that of Nigeria, they put South Africa with a population of about 53 million people. That would tell you that Nigeria, we are still coming up. As a nation, we should be talking about close to 200 and something trillion budget. If you don't agree with the numbers that I've just thrown at, let me be practical with you. If you are flying into Texas, United States of America, the airport that you land anywhere in Texas, as you are landing, if you sit by the window, peep through the window and look at the surrounding lands in that very airport, they are all fully developed. You will hardly see any green space. But juxtapose that with Even in an African country called Rwanda, as you fly into Rwanda, look at the land, surrounding lands within the airport, they are virtually all developed. Is it the case in Nigeria? As you fly into Abuja, for example, what do you look at?
Largely vast greenery.
Absolutely. What does that tell you? It tells you that these are lands that requires development. And you can replicate that across the length and breadth of all the international airports and domestic airports in Nigeria. Shows that we still need massive infrastructure in Nigeria. We need to develop. And for this to become a reality, a lot of resources and funds must go into it.
I totally agree with you, Honorable. It's not bad to have these projections of what needs to be done to improve the country. But the challenges with the number on the budget is in terms of the funding. We have set key indices on the appropriation bill that would guide the funding of the 2025 budget. Take, for instance, the exchange rate, and even the inflation rate, which the president has promised will be brought down to 15%. As it stands now, it's at 34% thereabout. And even in our crude oil production, we only barely met that of January, according to OPEC, of 1.5 million barrels per day. We're projecting over 2.3 million barrels per day to be able to fund our budget. Many say we continue to resort to borrowing to fund the budget. Now take, for instance, this figure, 54.99 trillion. 14.317 trillion of that money will be used for debt servicing, leaving merely 23 trillion for capital expenditures. Running the budget that way, are you satisfied that we'll be able to meet this ambitious projections of developing the vast undeveloped lands in the country at this rate?
Yeah, you've just brought in a whole lot, but we'll do our best to disentangle all that and have a clearer picture of where the budget is and the indices that got into the preparation of this budget. Yes, you've rightly said, the budget we have proposed in the 2025 budget that the inflation rate will come down to 15%. The question you should ask, is that realizable? That is rhetorics. Before you answer that, or before you throw the same question to me to answer, we have equally said we are going to base the budget on 2.06 million barrels of crude oil per day. Is that equally realizable? I will still answer that. Then we've equally based the currency exchange rate, naira to dollar, at about 1,500 to a dollar. Is that equally realizable? Now, as a nation, a developing nation, one thing everybody must know, that you cannot carry virtually 2, 3, 4, 5 things in your hands and expect to climb the hill. You first carry one, then use one hand to support your upward movement. You get to where you need to get to, you drop what you've carried, come back, pick the next thing. Out of all these 3 indicators, the exchange rate, the inflation rate, and the crude oil production, let me take the exchange rate. Where are we now? And 2 months ago, where were we? 5 months ago, where were we? Are we getting towards what we have earmarked in the budget? The answer is yes.
For the exchange rate?
For the exchange rate. That is exactly what I'm saying. So we have literally carried the exchange rate up the ladder. Now the inflation is there. The crude oil production is equally there. If we are meeting up with the exchange rate, what does that tell you about the 2 other indicators? Don't forget the exchange rate, the crude oil production, and of course, this other inflation, they all hinge on exchange rate, which affects the price indicators in our market. So when the exchange rate is at the same level with what is projected in the budget, obviously it's going to translate into all other things, because many of the prices of things we consume in Nigeria are affected by the exchange rate. So keep the exchange rate where it should be. It has multiplier effect. Do not also forget the budget has just been passed in both chambers. It has not yet been assented by Mr. President. And the moment Mr. President assents to that budget, it will transform a whole lot of things, because many investors and many other people that have one or two things to do in Nigeria, they are watching to see whether the president will sign.
Now, talking about Mr. President, before he assents to these bills, both chambers, like you rightly said, have passed it. Now, we saw some incremental changes. At first, it was 49 thereabout, like you said. The president sent a figure at the start of the year, and the 10th National Assembly said to add 700 billion naira to it. I don't know what informed this decision. We had a lot of reviewers last week in the studio who looked at the development commissions that are springing up in the 6th geopolitical zone, and they're saying to run them would be cash intensive. Is this 700 billion naira added in an upward review in light of this development, or what are some of the issues that came up that informed the House's decision to review the budget upwards?
I think one thing should be very clear, and Nigerians should equally have this knowledge, and I will equally implore the media houses to explain this to Nigerians perfectly well. What the president and the executive sends to National Assembly, they are merely proposals. It is not, there is no way in our laws that says what the president sent must not be touched, must not be tampered with. So why did you send it to us? If you look at Section 88 and Section 89 of the 1999 Constitution, clearly gives the Parliament, the National Assembly, the power of the purse. We are to look at what they are aspiring to achieve, and the National Assembly will equally look at it and in line with our interaction and oversight function, and can perfectly advise the executive, look, your proposal is not in tandem with the aspiration of Nigeria. Therefore, we are going to tinker with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the Parliament, the National Assembly, completely has that responsibility backed by law. Now, you talked about the increment of about 700 and something billion naira. You also talked about the development commissions that have just been signed into law, and most of them are operational. Don't forget, Nigeria does not operate an economy in isolation with what is happening in other world economies. When Donald Trump came into power, we all know the economic wars that he promised and he has implemented between China and US, between China and Canada, China and India. Recently, India just found a way to resolve some of their issues. And most of those things have a way of having effect in Africa. And when we talked about Africa now, we are talking about Nigeria, because we are the giant of Africa in terms of population. So when all those happenings were brought to our attention, especially most of the aids, the donor agencies, the funding partners that iter to Nigeria we're benefiting from, Donald Trump said, the president, which he has the power to shut them down, after all, it is their money. We are not going to benefit. And we also look at it, the fact that these things touch critical sectors in our health institution. We cannot, as a parliament, as a house of the people, fold our hands and not make provisions for ourselves in the budget to cater for those critical sectors of our national life. So that is what the parliament has done. Then you talked about the Development Commission. You look at Nigeria. Nigeria is known by six geopolitical zones. The north, which for over some years now have been ravaged by a whole lot of insecurity. We said, look, as a federal government, the state, in the wisdom of the executive, they cannot allow the state to shoulder most of this responsibility. Let us set up commissions to equally help in the building and the development of this commission, these zones. And in the wisdom of the executive, South-South Development Commission is being worked on, even though provision has been made in the budget for the take-off grants. The Northwest Development, the North Central, the Northeast, all of the Development Commission, they are there. Now, the question we should ask, When this development commission takes effect, are they going to add to the development of this region? If the answer is yes, then it's plus to those commission and for Nigeria. For example, you come to Southside where I come from, we have the NDDC that is there, basically due to oil derivation, 13%. But alongside the NDDC, if Southside Development Commission is up and running, is it going to add to the development of the commission or address some critical infrastructural decay in this area? The absolute answer is yes. So, if funds are allocated in the budget to cater for the needs of the people, I think the president should be applauded. Don't also forget, the primary responsibility of government is to make governance closer to the people, is to make life bearable for the people. If it is only one person that the new agencies, the new commission that have been established employ, certainly is going to reduce unemployment. If it is only one pipe-borne water that will be put in a community, is going to make life bearable. If it is only one tar road that the agency will do, obviously it's going to make life bearable. So whatever government can do to make life bearable for the people on whose mandate they are leading, they are governing, obviously should be applauded. The question should be equally true to us. How will we make sure as a parliament that every kobo channels to these development commissions are utilized based on the intent and the purpose of this money? That is where our oversight function kicks in.
Of course, Nigerians know that the oversight functions of this commission lies with the National Assembly. But the challenge here is at a time when the Stephen Oronsaya report is recommending a measure and a cut in the cost of governance, we see these development commissions springing up. I also agree that the needs of the people are paramount in delivering governance closer to the grassroots. But won't we have a case of duplications of projects and functions, much like you have mentioned in the Niger Delta, where there's also the NDDC, now we have the South-South Development Commission. Who is to say that some of these projects would not be duplicated? And how does the National Assembly in its oversight ensure that there is monitoring, evaluation, and proper accountability in the disbursements of funds that will go to these commissions?
When you say project duplication, I think we need to be on the same side. Because 1 kilometer of road in my local government, for example, Abak local government area, can be duplicated in Etim Ekpo local government area, and it can as well be duplicated in Ika local government area. So we need to be clear. So, except in terms of duplication, you are talking about 1 kilometer in Abak in a particular street, then in another budget cycle, the same project is located in that same location. Then that is purely duplication. That is where the oversight function of the National Assembly comes in, especially those members that have been penciled down to be in the committees that oversight these agencies. And like I said earlier, in other sister agencies, the media outfit, I said, look, the 10th Assembly has proven itself to be very different when it comes to oversight function. We have been up and doing in the sense that we've probed agencies. Obviously, let me say this, each time you cover an oversight function or committees meetings in the House, and the chairman in his wisdom says, look, let's go into closed session. Obviously meaning that we have seen something with what they've presented that is not in consonant with what they should be doing. And of course, as a matured parliament, you don't wash your dirty linen in public. So in order to save the many people, the many lofty objectives of those agencies, we call for executive session and we call the accounting officer, look, what you have done is completely in variance with what you should be doing. And in many instances, we've made recommendation to the executive for some accounting officers to be removed from office, to be sacked. Recently, you must have watched in the Senate where the Senate advised the executive to relieve some returning officers or resident electoral commissions of their position. That is the recommendations of the House. That is because as a result of our oversight function and investigation, we've seen some infractions and we need to just call for them to be sacked. But in doing that, we are equally very cautious on the fact that the agency's objective are not mutilated by the bad ache of one person. So we will be strong. We are not saying we are going to be perfect, but we will do our best. And if you put it on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 0 being the lowest, at the end of the 10th National Assembly, in terms of oversight function, we will be close to 8.
Nigerians will continue to keep their scorecards close to their hearts, and then we'll revisit this conversation much in the future to see how you perform. But another issue you've mentioned, which is key, is how international politics affects our budget here. The emergence of President Donald Trump and the suspension of aid to Nigeria, much like other countries across the world, has seen the National Assembly also propose 1.07 billion naira for the health sector. Many asked that over the years, the defense seems to get the massive chunk of the budget. Would we see going forward, probably in 2026 under the 10th National Assembly, a situation where education and maybe health can rival defense?
Yes. Now we are going to sectorial allocation. Let me read what I have here. Defense has gotten about 2.5 trillion naira in their recurrent expenditure, and about 604 billion naira for their capital expenditure. That is for defense. Of course, police is equally in that category. I won't go into police. Then you look at agriculture, where food sufficiency is important. They have a total of about 1.955 trillion naira for their capital expenditure, which is key. When we talk about recurrent expenditure, there is barely salaries and overhead and non-debts, whatever. But where it will really affect the Nigerians is in the capital component of the budget, which I would like to dwell. Then if you look at science and tech and innovations, where majority of the youths in Nigeria fall into, this budget of 2025 has allocated 1.2 trillion naira to address all those things. Then you look at works, of course, it's cut across every other person. Then Ministry of Youth, where it has been completely carved out from sport. Let us deal with our youth. About 442 billion naira is allocated to that ministry and all that. Then you talked about education that you mentioned. Education is taking about 953 billion naira. I think that is the highest so far in the history of our budget. So we have equally seen that in this budget, about 6 higher institutions will be created, established, based on the Act of the Parliament, which we have advised the President to establish more universities so that alongside other existing universities, our citizens, our students that write JAMs can equally gain admission effortlessly. Then you look at, there is this university that is managed by Navy. Initially, it was completely a private university, and the cost of tuition fee, we paid at that rate to cater for their need. But when they appeared before the Parliament, they said no, let it be open to Nigerians because of the quality of tutelage that is given in that university. So let it be open to other Nigerians for them to enroll. Therefore, we slash down the cost of tuition fee. In other words, government is equally subsidizing a whole lot in terms of their personnel costs. So that is what the Parliament is doing. We are making sure that no Nigeria is left untouched. And if you look at the student loans, so far we've allocated about 25 billion naira in 2025 to cater for the needs of Nigeria. If you are a student in the higher institution, you can apply for this loan, and the loan, the board will pay your tuition fee completely from year 1 to year 4 to year 5, maybe year 6, if there is any cost like that. And alongside that gives you 20,000 naira every month for your running costs. It has never happened in the history of Nigeria. This is a first in the history of this country, and they are all enshrined in this budget. So generally, I would tell you that the budget of 2025 is going to address a whole lot of critical things, especially those ones you've mentioned, the funding that we used to have from international partners that will not be forthcoming. We have made provisions, so Nigeria is not going to lose out on anything.
Now, this deficit is in the record of 13 trillion thereabouts. But in terms of our GDP, which plays a crucial role in this conversation, the deficit in terms of GDP ratio is there about 1.52. I don't know how Nigeria can better these conversations around our GDP. Over time, we've been accused of being a largely consuming nation, depending on importation. Our manufacturing sector is not that performing well. And even in the last GDP report, most of the credit went to the service economy. I don't know if the 10th National Assembly has deliberated on this issue, and are there proposals on the floor?
Yes, talking about GDP, let me say this. GDP to Nigerians, GDP is gross domestic product. It is the aggregate of everything, the goods and services we produce in Nigeria. And there is no rocket science, there is no magic in it. If we want to increase our GDP as a nation, we must go into production. And one of the bills, this brings me to some of my bills that I've moved in presented in the floor of the plenary. One of the bills is National Commission for the Establishment of Technology Transfer. And that is the core objective of that bill, is to harness our raw materials, is to ramp up our production, is to add value to our solid mineral sector. Because I look at it, we are called the giant of Africa. And by that, it is not because of our land size, it's simply because of our population. And if you look at the evolution of man before the introduction of fiat money, that's paper money, what we were using as a means of exchange was trade by barter. Trade by barter simply means I have beans, you have yam, I need yam, and you need beans. I simply exchange my yam with your beans, and I have beans and yam, you equally have beans and yam. I look at Nigeria, God has blessed us with solid mineral. Let me isolate one mineral. It's called lithium. Lithium is littered across the length and breadth of Nigeria, and it is predominantly deposited in the northern part of Nigeria. And one location in the north that is in abundance is called Nasarawa State. It's there, you cannot take it away. And one of the core ingredients in lithium is what is used in the production of battery that powers virtually all the battery-operated devices in this office, that powers all the handsets that we have in Nigeria. And then I look at what Bureau of Statistics has equally put out there, said we are using over 200 million handsets every day in Nigeria. Is it about the solar panels, the inverter batteries, the laptops that we use, the iPad that we, the tablets, even the cameras that powers? So many things are battery operated, and this thing has an ingredient called lithium, and we have this lithium in abundance. In fact, to make good of what we have, the president about a few months ago went to the to Nasarawa State and commissioned the largest lithium mining company in Nigeria, and he made a statement. He told the company, look, don't just cut this thing away raw, add value here, produce your solar panels here and shift it to the rest West African countries. So I said, if we have a law, a legal framework in place that mandatorily places an embargo, so to say, a demand for any product that must come into this country that has to do with battery, that battery component must be produced here in Nigeria. What did I mean by that? We tell, for example, a country like China, let me use that for example, they want to shift in 1 billion copies of handset. We'll tell them, fantastic idea, we have the market. But for us to allow that product to penetrate our market, intentionally, deliberately give us the technology to produce a component of that device, in this case battery. So you sit in your country, produce a 1 billion copy handset without battery. We produce a 1 billion copy battery in Nigeria. We complement what you are having. You sell your product to us maybe $5, we sell our own to you $1. With that simple arrangement and that marriage, we have added value to our solid mineral sector. We've ramped up our gross domestic product. We've created employment to our teeming population. So there is trade by barter. And what I propose in the bill is not in isolation with what other nations are using. For example, do you know that a country like Indonesia, when Apple needed to introduce their product in Indonesia, there was an embargo, there was a block. Say, look, you cannot enter into our country if we don't have a chunk share. Apple offered them initially $10 million US, they turned it down. Apple went again and offered $100 million, they turned it down. Apple went and offered $1 billion, they still turned it down. Why? Because Indonesia, they know the value of their market and what the company stands to benefit, and they said no, for us to have a share of what you are proposing to us, we must equally be beneficial with that. China is doing it. There are certain products that are USA nomenclated, cannot have a way in US. Example, WhatsApp is not working. Facebook is not working. TikTok is not working. They have their own, they develop their own because they are protecting their industry. So what do we have to protect if we don't stand up and say, look, Nigeria must not be a dumping ground. Other nations will equally make it a dumping ground. And that is exactly what the law intended to achieve. And I pray that the National Assembly, my colleagues, of course, it has scaled to first reading, second reading, public hearing. It's left for the committee to make their report, for it to be listed for third reading, for consideration, and for us to have a law. Nobody, it is my passionate belief that nobody will build this nation for us other than Nigerians.
I agree with you in that instance, and we'll come back to some of the bills, petitions, and other of your dealings on the floor of the House. But let's wrap up this conversation on the budget. The last part that interested me a lot was the charge from legislators to the executives going into 2026, if it is possible to submit the appropriation bills at least 3 months earlier in a quest to return Nigeria to the January to December budget cycle. What informed that decision, and do you think that the executive will be able to keep touch with this?
Yes, it is in line with the law. The Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 mandates the executive to make their proposals to the National Assembly at least 4 months. 4 months. Why the executive will not do it is because there is no penalty attached. It's just an advisory. But in the wisdom of the crafter of the Act, Fiscal Responsibility Act, it was the sole purpose to give the legislators, the parliament, the ample time for us to scrutinize and check all the MDAs, that what they are doing is in tandem with what they should be doing. If you observe the 2025 budget that we've just passed, we barely dealt with many critical agencies, because there is no time. Sometimes you need to jottle between 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6 committees in order for you to interface with the MDS. Whereas if we have the ample time, we can bring out a schedule and deal. This week we are dealing with Ministry of Defense and all its agencies. Next week we are dealing with Ministry of Finance with all its agencies and all its departments. Then it will give us the time to go through their budget defense, go through their budget proposal line by line, and to query. Sometimes after meeting with them in the chambers, in the committee rooms, we needed to follow up with an on-the-spot inspection, the oversight. We pay an unscheduled visit to the site where they have said they are constructing ABC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But since there is no time and the late presentation of the budget by the executive, we are hampered. I'm actually the person that moved a motion of urgent public importance with that regard. I said, look, the delays of the executive for presenting budget late technically takes away the time of the parliament to do our oversight function. And I tell you, for us to reset this country called Nigeria, the parliament has a critical role to play in its oversight function. I equally saw that in the budget, there are so many projects that the executive have planned, sometimes release funds, but they are not implemented because there is no body to follow up on those projects. And sometimes they are executed haphazardly because there is no proper monitoring and evaluation.
Now, this issue is an issue that Serap also raised, but my issue with the way Serap presented it was that Serap is suing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for failing to publish the names of the contractors in over 31 MDAs in what they call a project fraud amounting to over 169 billion naira. Why sue the president who has immunity? Why not go after those without immunity involved in this contract?
That is the question. You see, people want to play to the gallery. The law is very clear. The Public Procurement Act 2007 is very clear. If there is any infraction that an agency of government has awarded a contract to a firm, to a company, and they fail to carry out, the laws are there, the penalties are there. So when an agency like that you've mentioned fails to do what is needful and go to the president to sue the president, I don't understand what he's trying to achieve. If, for example, there are several firms from the procuring agencies of government that I know, some of the projects that are domiciled for my constituency. When once I know it is in the budget, I call the head of the agency. I am interested in making sure this project is delivered within record time. And when they carry out the procurement, awarded the contract, they avail me with the contact of the person, the firm that they have awarded the contract. And I set up a project monitoring team in my community, in my federal constituency. I told them, look, this man is coming to execute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the agency will give me the bill of quantities and the design of what is expected. I hand over to my people. I say, follow it up and make sure exactly what is in the bill is executed. And that is how we have achieved almost in all of our projects. But before I came in, that was not the case. Now, if we have this kind of thing duplicated across the 360 federal constituency, will we have project at least up to 70 to 80 project execution? The answer is yes. But then, this knowledge is not in every person. That is why I keep telling Nigerians, look, the budget is a public document. Download it, it's on the internet. Go through it, just search, use the search button. Put your local government area, Abak for example, type, bam. Every project that is in Abak local government will come out. And the agencies where they are domiciled will come out. Then you take another step, write to these ministries, write to this agency. Look, I have seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 EMR for my local government area. Please, I'm interested in making sure they are done and on record time. Believe me, the agency will respond to you, because the agencies and the ministry, they are in partnership to making sure that they interpret the vision of Mr. President. And if Mr. President does not want a project to be executed, it will not be in the budget, and it will not be in the ministry, it will not be in the agency.
Now, on this public interest, the only time, most times, you find Nigerians quite interested in conversations on the budget or even the National Assembly is looking at lawmakers like yourself and asking how much do you take home vis-a-vis the constituency projects. When you talk about the budget in its entirety in terms of sectoral allocations, only a few learned persons sit down and look at it. But when you have the conversations on how much a lawmaker is taking home and how much is interpreted in terms of constituency projects, most Nigerians are very interested not in following on the projects, but in following the houses of their federal lawmakers to knock at the door. What's your experience in this regard, and how are you changing this narrative?
I am doing my best in that regard. And I will say this to Nigerians again. I am one of the lawmakers that is very vocal when it comes to that. Recall, about a year and 6 months ago, I placed on my Facebook page that all forms of monetary solicitations for burial is hereby suspended. And I still stand by that. Because you see, many Nigerians see a public office holder as a money-making machine. You have a child dedication, your house member must fund the drinks for your entertainment. You have a burial, he must buy the coffin and the entertainment. You want to go to toilet, he must provide you with the tissue paper and possibly the water to flush. I said no. And I look at what is legitimately mine every month. Then I look at the demands, and I said, if we go by this, it is practically impossible to meet up the needs, except you want to steal. Except projects that are earmarked, just like the constituency project we are talking about, that are earmarked for your constituency, you are not going to execute them. And there are many ways not to execute them. And the people will not even know. Because when the demands flood your timeline, you want to convert the project to cash in order to meet up their demands, to the detriment of thousands of people that would have benefited for a road project in the community, a solar street light in the community, renovation of schools in the community, and so many other things that have multiplier effect in the community. You cannot eat your cake and have it. And I said no. That is why within this 1 year and about 8-9 months I've been in office, we have started and completed 3 brand new 6 classroom blocks. It has never happened in the history of the federal constituency. We started it and we completed it. We hand them over. What over 250 million naira in the budget. and that was carried out by an agency of government called CMD, Center for Management Development. I lay it bare for people to see. We've equally constructed a solar-powered borehole in 3 local government areas. Currently, people are benefiting for that project. The total cost is about 200 million. It was done by Ministry of Agriculture in a department called Horticulture in Gombe State. Is there budgetary provision? It has been completed. People are benefiting. And these are things, if I don't follow up, I don't have my people in mind, they will not be done. Because you follow it up for monies to be released, you follow it up for the contractor to do a good job, and you make sure they do a good job. The contractor is there to make his money. If you don't follow him up, he will do what needs to be done and makes most of the money to the detriment of your community. So these are the things Nigerians can equally help themselves with. Everybody wants to know what is my lawmaker giving me, blah, 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 blah. But how are you helping your lawmaker to make sure the projects that are in the budget are realized? If a group of people in a community call their lawmaker and say, look, I have seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the budget, when will they be implemented? Don't you know it will put the lawmaker on his toes to make sure that those things are implemented? Because if you go for maybe a next election or look for anything, the people will ask you, this thing was in the budget, why were they not implemented? And what answer will you give?
A very important question on the program this morning in the studio. We have Honorable Clement Jimbo. He is a lawmaker representing Abak, Ika, and Etim Ekpo Federal Constituencies in Akwa Ibom State. He says in a year and over 9 months he's been in office, he's had to stop the door knocking, cap in hand, demanding money from lawmakers attitude that some Nigerians exhibit towards their lawmakers. He's charging Nigerians in reference to budgetary provisions and constituency allocations to follow the projects up until the implementation and on the timelines as deliverable, with a true needs assessment to move away from stomach infrastructure to adequately providing governance for the people. Now, not to dwell so much on the 2025 budget, but let's also touch on other issues on the floor of the Green Chambers. There have been large conversations on the need to review the 1999 Constitution as amended. Now, in light of that, there have been 32 proposals on the Green Chambers demanding for the creation of more states, 32 states, that would change Nigeria's structure, as it were, from 36 states and the federal capital to well over 67 states. This would also have quite vast implications as to what geopolitical zones will get more states. It's a conversation that we're going to have right now before we delve into some of the personal motions and bills you've raised on the floor of the House. I don't know, not to sound rhetorical, but regionalism used to be one of those conversations in the 70s and 80s. We delved into the need to have federalism at the helm in Nigeria. We're back to this conversation again in terms of what some people feel is marginalization and how ethnic groups can be better represented in a federal system that would accommodate what now? 67 more states? What do you make of this development?
Well, it's very laughable. Because I'm one person I'm not playing to the gallery. I'm one person that will not support the creation of any additional state in Nigeria.
Why is that so?
Yes, I have my facts and I have my reasons. You see, we are currently 36 states plus the FCT Abuja. We are currently in a government that has increased the minimum wage of civil servants from 30,000 naira to 70,000 naira. The question is, how many of these states are viable to pay without having to come to the federal government?
Demanding for federal allocation.
So before a state creation is talked or is contemplated, let's talk about the viability. Are you just trying to create a state so in order for somebody who wouldn't have been a governor to carry the title of a governor? It's wrong. The motive is wrong. And anything that is premised on a wrong motive cannot stand the test of time. Ever since the military created the states that we are currently enjoying, there is no democratic government that has been able to create additional states because there are stringent provisions in the Constitution that I'm sure all the proposals so far received, 31 that the Deputy Speaker read, none of them may be able to meet up the stringent conditions enshrined in the 1999 Constitution.
Can you give us an insight to our viewing public some of these conditions, please?
It is very simple. First, you must carry out a referendum. For example, let me use my state for an example. Let's say we want to create additional state out of Akwa Ibom State. Don't forget, right now we have Akwa Ibom State with 3 senators, with 10 federal lawmakers, with House of Assembly, 27 House of Assembly members, with commissioners, with citizens, and with 31 local government areas. That is already delineated as a state, Akwa Ibom State. Then you say, okay, you want to create additional state out of Akwa Ibom State. Let's say, call it any name, let's say Abak State. Now, for us to have a Abak State, I, as a lawmaker, representing a local government in that federal constituency, must agree to the creation of a Abak State. The House of Assembly members in the existing Akwa Ibom State must agree to have a Abak State. The citizens in that local government area must equally agree to have a Abak State. Then we must take up that demands further and present it to INEC. Say, INEC, that is the first place you even need to write to, not the National Assembly. Then INEC will accept your proposal, come to do a referendum, carry out a referendum, let the people agree of your proposal. And when that is done, you take another step further by enlisting the senators representing the senatorial district of that area. And the governor currently in charge of the state, which the current Abak local government that you want to take out to be a Abak state, is dominated, domicile, must agree. So when all this is put together, that is when they now approach the National Assembly. And when you approach the National Assembly, you begin to lobby members of the National Assembly at this point in time, not just members representing that federal constituency. It must cut across. It must pass through first reading, second reading, public hearing, and third reading, then pass. Then you must equally do public hearing, where the entire Nigerians must equally agree with you. After that, to take majority of the lawmakers in Akwa Ibom State must equally support.
The State House
of Assembly must support. And let me ask you a question. Which state governor currently seated who want you to come and split his state?
Do you think this is also in line with the increased federal allocation since the suspension of fuel subsidy?
I agree with you. That is why I said the intention is wrong. It's purely born out of greed. Let me have a state of my own, possibly so that in the nearest future I can be a governor. Let me have federal allocation that comes to me. But nobody has sat down to look at critically the viability of that state away from the federal allocation. If I say, let me create a back local government area as a state, what are the solid minerals? How can I transform the solid mineral to become money for me to take care of the civil servant that I will employ? The state, the infrastructures that will be built. If I have not done all that, then talking about state creation, local government creation, Abak is completely balderdash. It's like, let me buttress it with this. It's like you are a father, you already have 10 children. And you are earning 1,000 naira. And you know that 1,000 naira has not taken care of your 10 children. And you say the solution to you meeting the resources to cater for your 10 children is to have more children. Are you okay?
Now this is another challenge on the viability. As it stands with the new minimum wage, there are also certain states that are struggling to pay civil servants in their states. There's newly agreed 70,000 naira, and this is going to be a conversation going forward.
Absolutely.
But with the limited time we have on our hands, let's also throw the spotlight on you. So far, you've sponsored 3 bills, you've moved 3 motions. One thing stands out for me because in the motions and bills you have moved and sponsored, conversation on agriculture, particularly in Akwa Ibom State, where you're also proposing the creation of a federal University of Agriculture in the state, and in line with the prayer to end food insecurity through what you've called a revolutionization of the agricultural
mechanization.
Please shed more light on this and let's understand where this is coming from.
Okay, fantastic. Let me deal with the agriculture first. I move a motion on urgent public importance, and I call the attention of federal government to go into mechanized farming. Thank God we are talking about regional development here. Nigeria is known by 6 geopolitical zones. Could it be the reason why each time we move into election year, like close to December 2025 into 2026, the whole country will be agog with political movement? Could it be the reason why we are so alive when it comes to politics? Every nook and cranny of Nigeria and every boy on the street talks about politics because we have so named our country 6 geopolitical zones. Okay, let us equally flip it. Alongside the 6 geopolitical zones, let us equally name it 6 geo-agricultural zones. Across the length and breadth of Nigeria, we have what is called comparative advantage in crop production. There are soils in Nigeria that do better, well, with very little or little improvement on the soil, like what is happening in the north. Many of the grains we consume come from the northern Nigeria. Many of the other things we consume come from the southern Nigeria. So why can't we leverage on that in synergy with the state governors and say, look, we are going to create what is called 6 geo-agricultural zones. The south, what are you predominantly good in? Let us earmark 1,000 hectares of land and focus on that particular crop production year in, year out. The same thing with the southwest, the same thing with the north central, the same thing with the northeast, and the rest of the zones. And let us appoint 6 ministers, I call them project managers, in each of these zones. And let their remuneration be based on what they are able to produce every year. If, for example, somebody that is managing the south, at the end of the day, produce a cassava worth 1 billion naira for the entire Nigeria, let a percentage of that be given to me as remuneration. Will that trigger productivity in those regions? Will that trigger competition? When you know that what you are producing will be bought by the entire Nigerians and the person that is in charge will get a percentage, that will bring him all out to make sure productivity is at the top burner. Nigeria has no business with importation of any arable food that we eat in this country. God has blessed us. Many of the things that we used to think that cannot be cultivated in Nigeria, time and chance has made it very possible. Even tomatoes that are cultivated in the north can equally be done in the south.
Our potentials is very undeniable, but the challenge now is the value addition of the chain. Nigeria, over time, we used to have the groundnut pyramids in Kano. We had rubber in Cross River. Then it was the Aqua Cross State. But over time, exporting this has been challenging in terms of preservation. Are there some parts of this proposal that has some ways we can add value across the agricultural chain so that we can export them beyond consume within Nigeria?
Absolutely. I tell anybody that gets to know, say, look, any child that goes to bed hungry in Nigeria is not supposed to be so. It's because somebody somewhere is not doing his work. We don't have any business with hunger in this country. No, not at all. Look at, just like we started this conversation, look at the arable lands. Okay, just take example, you are traveling from Abuja here by road to the south, let's say Akwa Ibom State. Sometimes you enter into a road, the left flank and the right flank are all bushes, green areas, uncultivated. So why can't we go into the cultivation? And when we cultivate, who says we cannot export? Who says we cannot improve on what needs to be exported for us to gain what we need for further production? How are other nations doing it? For example, now, I started out, apart from being a quantity surveyor and a project manager that deals completely with the construction subsector, I am equally into farming, poultry farming. When I started poultry farming, a bag of poultry feed went for about 2,300 a bag, 25 kg. But right now, how much is a bag of that same poultry feed? It goes for close to 27,000 naira. Now, what are the ingredients used in the production of feed for poultry? Is it not maize? Do we have lands that are good in the cultivation of maize? That is it.
The challenge is with also the policies of the federal government, and this is the last question in closing. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu had declared a state of emergency on food insecurity. Late last year, we also saw a free duty importation waiver for certain food products, which many complained was not largely tapped into. I don't know where the disconnect is in terms of the policy of governments, some interventions on hand to bring Nigerian respite, and in times of oversight on the part of our federal lawmakers. Do you see any reason why there might be disconnect that allows for certain policies not to yield the resultant effects Nigerians desire?
I agree with you. There are people that are in government that are obviously should not be in government. That's because they are not, either they don't know their responsibility or they are totally lazy. They don't want to do what needs to be done. Government, to deliver government deliverables to the benefit of Nigerians is not a walk in the park. It must tax you. You must sacrifice. And many people that find themselves in those positions are not willing to roll their sleeves to do the needful. For example, when I moved that motion, federal government swiftly went into action and earmarked 500,000 hectares of land for massive mechanized farming. Nasarawa State as a state keyed into that. And Nasarawa is currently cultivating 10,000 hectares of land in terms of rice cultivation. They've already cultivated the first 2,000 hectares and they have harvested. So what stops other state governors keying into that same sector? If you cannot cultivate rice, what can be cultivated in your state? Key into it. So that is what I said. There are people in government that certainly do not have any business in government. Government is a hard work for those that are sincere, that wants to meet up the yearning and the aspiration of people that they govern. It's not a place to drive beautiful cars. It's not a place to live in fine houses. Beside gaining all that, what quantum of deliverables are you giving to your people is the question. The federal government has given out policies, they are there. The state, based on the Land Use Act, are domiciling the state governors. So if they don't open their purse and make those lands available, and they go to it to the extent of making equipment available, why will it be cultivated? There are certain things government do and must be seen doing. I, as an individual, if I want to go into farming, I will be limited. Because first, I need to apply to the Ministry of Land in a state to approve for me a land. I need to have enough money to secure the land. I need to do improvement on the land. I need to buy equipment. For crying out loud, as an individual, where will I have all the resources to go into that? No, but as a government, a governor can sit down today and call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commissioners of this and said, look, tomorrow I want 20 hectares of land, 50 hectares of land to be cleared, and they will do it. They already have the security, the police, the DSS, the civil defense. He can have them in a meeting and say, I want this place to be protected. The Minister of Agriculture is there. He can call the commissioner and say, look, go to NAUDA, get me the current improved seedling in this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to cultivate it within 1 month, and it will be done. That is the power of a governor. But many of the time, they don't make use of this power, and the people suffer for it.
Well, I must appreciate you. I'm afraid this is where we have to draw the curtains to a close on quite an insightful and engaging conversation. We're happy that you availed yourself this opportunity to explain some of the bills you've moved and the intentionality behind it.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm grateful for this conversation.